Tomorrow I'm getting married. I already emptied all your bank accounts and sold the house. Goodbye. My heart shattered into a million pieces hearing my only son say this over the phone the very night before his wedding. Right next to him, the voice of my future daughter-in-law boomed. Good job, babe. That is exactly how a real man acts. It turned out that for them, my own flesh and blood was not worth a single dime. They thought I would start screaming, that I would fall to my knees like a beggar to plead with them. They believed that a single phone call could erase the 40 years it took me to build this home. But I just laughed. A laugh that silenced him instantly. If they only knew that this house was just a trap I had prepared, perhaps they would not have laughed with such gusto. Their downfall begins now. Do not look away, because the truth is about to be revealed. My name is Susan Miller. I am 63 years old. Never in my life have I stepped foot in the elegant parties at the country club, nor have I entered those lounges where people close deals mixing English and French. I am simply an ordinary woman, one who lived off a librarian's salary, extra shifts, and calloused hands that always knew how to keep quiet at the right moment. Silence so my son would not see his poor mother. Silence so he would believe he deserved a better world than mine. It was the night before his wedding. The house was submerged in that deep stillness. I was carefully ironing my navy blue dress. It was an elegant, discreet dress, with a silk shawl I had saved for years for a special occasion. Tomorrow, my only son, Thomas, would get married before the eyes of God and men. I only asked the Virgin that this woman, my future daughter-in-law, Vanessa, would take good care of him. Suddenly the phone vibrated on the wooden table. It was Thomas. It was almost midnight. Had something happened? Was he sick? Did he get cold feet? I slid my finger to answer, expecting to hear the nervous voice of a groom before the big day. Hello, son. Are you okay? I asked, with the sweetness I always reserved for him. But the voice on the other side was a dry tone, like that of a stranger reading a contract. Mum, I do not have much time, so listen well, he said, cutting off my greeting. Tomorrow I am getting married, and Vanessa and I have decided to start our life without burdens. I just used the power of attorney you signed when you were sick. I have withdrawn all the money from your savings account, everything, and the house. The house is already sold. He paused. The closing was done today. You have 30 days to get your things out. Deal with your own life. Goodbye. The world stopped. I felt the blood draining from my face. My legs failed, and I had to let myself fall onto the edge of the bed. What are you saying, Thomas? I whispered, my throat knotted with panic. Those are my life savings. That house is the work of 40 years. There was no hesitation. There was not a shred of remorse. Only silence. And then I heard a woman's voice in the background. It was Vanessa, the one who tomorrow would officially be my son's wife. I will never forget it. Her mocking voice, hissing like a snake. Very good, my love. That is how decisive you have to be. A real man knows how to cut the dead weight. They had touched my final limit. For them, I was not a mother. I was not the woman who took the bread out of her own mouth so he could study. I was just a nuisance, a bank account with legs that was no longer useful. And that night, they had betrayed me like that. Surely, in that moment, they expected me to scream, to beg, to cry begging them not to do this to me. They believed that 40 years of effort and all my savings could be destroyed easily with a single call. But then something strange happened inside me. The pain lasted only a few seconds. A sudden clarity, strange and cold, took over me. My eyes looked out the window, toward the darkness of the night, and then at the house they thought they had sold. And I started to laugh. a dry cackle. I laughed because they thought they had control. I laughed at their ignorance, so bold. On the other end of the line, the silence became heavy. They did not expect this. "Mom, are you crazy? What are you laughing at?" Thomas asked, and for the first time his tough guy voice trembled. You could tell he was afraid, the fear of someone who does not understand what is happening. I wiped a tear that had escaped, not of sadness, but of pure irony. "Oh, Thomas," I said finally, with a voice so calm that even I surprised myself. "I am not crazy, my son. I am lucid, more lucid than ever. Enjoy your wedding tomorrow. Enjoy the champagne and the applause." I hung up without waiting for an answer. I looked at the black screen of the phone. Then I looked at my son's photo on the wall. The Thomas I loved had died tonight. I got up, walked to the mirror, and looked at myself. I saw a 63-year-old woman, with wrinkles and grey hair, but with the gaze of a lioness that has just woken up. Tomorrow I will go to that wedding. Not to celebrate. I will go to see how the house of cards they built on my back collapses. The night is long, but the sunrise will bring justice. And the justice of a betrayed mother is something they should be terrified of. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone still in hand, though the screen had gone dark a while ago. The darkness of the room felt heavy, dense, but not as much as the knot I had in my throat. There were no tears. Curious, right? One would think that in a moment like this a mother would break down crying, but the pain was so deep it had dried everything up inside. I couldn't lie back down. I stayed there, motionless, while my mind, treacherous as always in the early hours, started rewinding the movie of my life. I was trying to find the exact moment I lost my son. And then, the memory hit me. It wasn't today. It wasn't yesterday. It was the day she crossed the threshold of this door. 3 years ago, Thomas brought Vanessa home for the first time. She came accompanied by her father, Mr. Richard Sterling. From the moment they got out of their shiny car, I saw how they looked at my neighborhood. They wrinkled their noses, as if the air here smelled different from their elegant, gated community. Richard walked with his chest puffed out, talking loudly about family names and lineage, although we all knew his expensive suits sometimes looked a bit worn at the cuffs. That night changed everything. I had spent 2 whole days in the kitchen. I wanted to impress them, to show them that, although we didn't have luxuries, in this house there was plenty of love. I prepared my special lasagna, a recipe my grandmother taught me. I laid out the hand-embroidered tablecloth, the one I only used at Christmas. I took out the good china. When we sat at the table, I served the plates with a nervous smile, waiting for a compliment. Richard looked at the steaming plate in front of him. He didn't pick up the fork. He just pushed it slightly with his finger, with a gesture of absolute contempt. "What is this, Mrs. Miller?" he asked, looking at the sauce as if it were mud. "In my family, we are used to fine cuts, to international food. This food, so heavy, so common. The truth is, it disagrees with us. It is poor people's food. No offense." I felt as if I had been slapped. My face burned with shame. But what killed me wasn't his rudeness. It was what Thomas did. My eyes sought my son. They sought defense. They sought for him, who had grown up eating that lasagna, to pound the table and demand respect for his mother. But Thomas didn't look at me. He lowered his head, ashamed. He turned red, but not from anger against them, but from shame for me. "Dad is right," Vanessa said, with a mocking little laugh, taking my son's hand. "Thomas, babe, tell your mother to better order some pizzas. We don't want to get sick before the trip, right?" And there came the final stab. Thomas, my Thomas, looked up and told me with an irritated voice, "Mum, please take this away. You heard Richard. They don't like this food. Better bring something more decent or order fast food. Don't embarrass us anymore. Take this away. Don't embarrass us anymore." Those words stuck in my chest, deeper than any knife. I got up in silence. My hands were trembling so much the plates rattled as I collected them. I felt like a servant in my own home. I swallowed my pride along with the tears. I went to the kitchen and threw the lasagna in the trash. 3 days of work, 3 days of love, into the trash. That night, while they ate pizza in my living room, something died inside me, and something else woke up. I realized my son was weak, a paper man who folded at the first breath of status and money. He had let himself be dazzled by the fake shine of that family that believed themselves nobility, but had no manners. Thomas wanted to belong to their world so much he was willing to trample me. I blamed myself for months. I thought I had failed. I taught him to be good, but I forgot to teach him to have character. I forgot to teach him that dignity is not negotiable and that you only have one mother. I gave him everything, and by giving him everything, I left him empty inside. But that night was a warning, an alarm signal that, thank God, I didn't completely ignore. Sometimes I wonder, how many mothers ignore the red flags just to keep the peace? How many of us swallow the insults thinking it's love? I understood that if he wasn't going to protect me, I had to protect myself. I stopped telling him my business. I stopped talking to him about my savings. I started seeing Vanessa not as my son's girlfriend, but as what she really was, a predator who had smelled blood. And my son wasn't the victim. He was the willing accomplice. The darkness of the room seemed to clear, not because dawn was breaking, but because my determination shone stronger than my sadness. Enough lamenting, Susan, I told myself. You already cried enough that night. Today is not a night for crying. I got up. My bare feet didn't feel the cold of the floor. I walked with a steady step toward the old wooden closet. I moved the coats aside and put my hand in the back, feeling for the false wall my late husband had built. My fingers found the loose panel. I removed it, and there it was, my small safe. I spun the combination, right, left, right. I opened the steel door and took out a worn leather folder. I hugged it against my chest for a second. Everything was here. Here was the truth. Here was the trap they didn't even know existed. I approached the window, where the light of the full moon illuminated the papers. My eyes scanned the legal letters, the signatures, the stamps. A bitter smile appeared on my lips, very different from the sweet smile I used to have. Thomas thinks he has taken everything from me. He thinks I am a defenseless old woman who will be on the street tomorrow. He doesn't know that this old woman has spent 3 years preparing for war. I caressed the folder. Tomorrow, my son, you are going to learn the most expensive lesson of your life, and it is going to be taught to you by the woman who gave you life. The sun came out that Saturday morning with an intensity that hurt the eyes. It was the wedding day. Any mother would be at the beauty salon, nervous, adjusting her headpiece or crying with emotion. Not me. I dressed in my lead-grey tailored suit. I applied makeup carefully, hiding the dark circles of a sleepless night, and put on my pearls. I wasn't going to the church. I had a much more important appointment before seeing my son at the altar. I arrived at Mr. Henderson's office at 8 o'clock sharp. Mr. Henderson is an old friend of my late husband, a man of laws who knows the secrets of this town better than the priest. Seeing me enter, he got up from his leather chair, concerned by my serious expression. "Mrs. Miller," he said, offering me a seat. "You shouldn't be here. Today is Thomas's big day." I stared at him and placed the leather folder on his mahogany desk. Today is not a day of celebration, Mr. Henderson. It is a day of judgment. Thomas called me last night. He used the power of attorney, sold the rental house, and emptied my accounts. He thinks he also sold my house where I live. He has left me, according to him, on the street. The lawyer opened his eyes wide, adjusted his glasses, and took the folder with quick hands. He started reading the documents I had prepared with such meticulousness over the last 3 years. Thomas thinks I am an ignorant old woman, I continued, my voice firm without trembling. He thinks I spend the day knitting and watching soap operas. He doesn't know that when he brought that woman and her father into my life, I started to armor plate my assets. Mr. Henderson read, and little by little, a smile of disbelief and admiration appeared on his face. "Susan, this is brilliant," he murmured. "Explain it to me yourself, counselor. I want to hear it from your mouth to be sure the trap is shut tight." Mr. Henderson leaned back in his chair and interlaced his fingers. "It's perfect, Susan. Thomas sold the property on Olive Street, the rental house. Surely he found a quick buyer for the price. But what Thomas didn't see, because he never reads the fine print, is this contract we signed before a notary 2 weeks ago." "Exactly," I nodded. "The house has a valid lease contract for 10 years, in favor of Mr. Matt, my tenant," I explained, feeling a cold satisfaction in my chest. "And it's not just any contract. It is registered in the public records. The buyer who gave the money to Thomas just bought a house he cannot inhabit nor demolish for a decade. And when that buyer finds out Thomas hid that information, they are going to sue him for fraud," Mr. Henderson completed. "And it will be a criminal lawsuit. Selling a property while hiding encumbrances is a serious crime." "But that isn't the best part," I said, leaning forward. "Let's talk about my house, the house where he grew up, the one he promised his father-in-law to pay off his debts." Mr. Henderson let out a brief laugh. "That is the jewel in the crown, Susan. Thomas thinks he sold your house. Surely he already received an advance. But here I see the trust document." "That's right. 3 years ago, when I saw the ambition in Vanessa's eyes, I donated the deed ownership of my house to the St. Jude Church Charity Foundation. I reserved solely the life estate for myself." "Explain to people what that means, please," I asked, knowing I needed to reaffirm it for myself. "It means you have the right to live in that house until the last day of your life. Nobody can kick you out. But you are no longer the owner of the bricks. The owner is the church. Therefore, the power of attorney Thomas stole is useless to sell that house, because that house is no longer his to sell." I leaned back against the chair backrest and sighed. The air left my lungs, taking part of the anguish with it. "So," I summarized, "my son has sold a house that cannot be used, and has collected on another house that does not belong to him." "Exactly, Mrs. Miller. In legal terms, your son has walked into the wolf's mouth. The moment the buyers try to take possession and realize the reality, Thomas will not only have to return the money he already spent on the wedding, but he will face criminal charges for scamming, false declarations, and real estate fraud." Silence filled the office. I looked out the window toward the street, where people walked calmly, oblivious to the storm about to unleash. "Poor kid," Mr. Henderson said softly. "He doesn't know his life as a free man ends today." "No, Mr. Henderson, not poor kid. He chose this. He had 3 years to show me he loved me, 3 years to defend me from his girlfriend's humiliations. And last night, when he called to tell me he was leaving me on the street, he signed his sentence. I just provided the paper. He provided the signature." I got up and smoothed my skirt. I felt powerful. I was no longer the victim. I was the owner of the chessboard. "Let's go, counselor. We have a wedding to attend. I want to see my son's face when he realizes his inheritance is nothing more than smoke and ashes." I grabbed my purse. For the first time in a long time, I walked with my head high. My son had underestimated the woman who taught him to walk, and today I am going to teach him how to fall. I have had to use the most painful lesson in the world to teach my own son what respect is. It hurts my soul, but the wound of betrayal bleeds more than that of punishment. Is there anyone out there listening to me? Someone who has felt the cold of a child's ingratitude? Someone whose own flesh and blood turned their back on them for money or to please a partner? When the taxi turned the corner of my street, I felt a momentary relief seeing my house still standing. But that relief was short-lived. Brenda, my neighbor of a lifetime and my soul sister, was standing on the sidewalk. She had her arms crossed and that eagle look she gets when she knows something the rest of the world ignores. As soon as she saw me get out of the car, she made an urgent sign with her hand. It wasn't a greeting. It was a warning. I hurried to cross the street. Brenda grabbed my arm tightly and pulled me into her house, locking the deadbolt behind us. Her kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and fresh gossip, but her face was pale. "Sit down, Susan," she ordered me, pushing me gently toward a wooden chair. "You have to know what happened yesterday while you were at the market, buying your things for the wedding." I felt a knot in my stomach. Brenda never exaggerates. If she is scared, I should be terrified. "Yesterday afternoon, I saw Thomas's car park in front of your door," she started recounting, lowering her voice as if the walls had ears. "But he didn't come alone. He came with the girlfriend, that Vanessa, and with her dad, that man who always wears a suit, even if it's hot as hell." "And what did they do?" I asked, although deep down I already knew. "They entered, Susan, and they didn't ring the doorbell. They had keys. Your keys." My blood boiled. My son had given them access to my sanctuary. "I went near the fence to water my pots," Brenda continued, squeezing my hand. "Loud noises were heard, drawers opening, things falling to the floor. They were searching for something desperately. They looked like thieves in their own house. But the worst wasn't that." "What was it?" "I heard the father, Richard. He went out to the patio to smoke, and he was talking on the phone. He was shouting Susan. He was saying they had threatened him. He was saying, 'Don't worry, the money drops tomorrow. After the wedding, I liquidate everything. But don't send the collectors after me yet.'" There it was, the missing piece in this puzzle of betrayal. It wasn't just that Thomas wanted a better life. It was that his father-in-law owed money, a lot of money, and probably to very dangerous people. My son wasn't robbing me just out of greed. He was selling me to save the skin of a vicious old man. "We have to be sure," I said, standing up. My mind was working a mile a minute. "I need to see them." "Let's go to Matt," Brenda suggested. "Your tenant is a genius with those computer things. He checked the cameras he installed last month." We crossed the backyard toward the guest house where Matt lives. He is a good boy, an engineer, who has always treated me with more respect than my own blood. Seeing us, he opened the door and sat us in front of his monitor without saying a word. He already knew what we came for. "Mrs. Miller, brace yourself," Matt warned with a grave voice. "You aren't going to like what you see." Matt typed something and the screen came to life. The video was dated yesterday. I saw Vanessa enter my bedroom as if she were the owner. I saw her throw my clothes on the floor, kick my mementos, open my jewelry box and empty it into her purse. I saw Richard looking through my papers at the desk, looking for deeds, looking for accounts. But what broke my heart wasn't seeing strangers robbing me. It was seeing Thomas. My son was standing in the doorframe of the living room. He didn't help search, but he didn't stop them either. He was there, arms crossed, guarding the entrance. He was the silent accomplice. He allowed those people to violate the privacy of the woman who gave him life and cleaned his diapers. "That boy is lost," Brenda murmured with disgust. But Matt hadn't finished. There is something else, Mrs. Miller. I took the liberty of reviewing old recording songs. I wanted to find out since when they have the keys, and I found this. The date on the screen changed. It went back 6 months. It was the week I was admitted to the hospital for that pneumonia that almost killed me. I remember that night. I had a fever of 104 degrees and was delirious. Thomas had told me he couldn't stay with me at the hospital because he had to work a double shift at the factory to pay for my medicines. I cried with gratitude for having such a hard-working son. But the video showed another truth. It was 2 in the morning. Thomas entered the house. He wasn't coming from work. He went straight to my purse, which I had left forgotten on the coat rack. He took out my debit card. He left the house and walked toward the ATM on the corner. He returned 20 minutes later, counting a wad of bills. He put them in his pocket and went to sleep in his room. I felt like I was running out of air. That night, while I fought to breathe in a hospital bed, my son wasn't working for me. He was robbing me. Every bill he took out was a stab. His supposed concern, his tiredness, everything was a lie. He had been financing his whims with my illness. "Mrs. Miller, are you okay?" Matt asked, worried. "Yes," I responded. My voice sounded strange, cold as ice. "I am better than ever. Why now? I have no doubts anymore. The pity has run out, Matt. It ran out right now." At that moment, my cell phone vibrated in my purse. I took it out slowly. A new message from Thomas. "Mum, you better not think about showing up at the church. We don't want you there making your dramas. You don't have a house or money anymore, so you better go look for a shelter. Disappear from my sight, and let us be happy." I read the message out loud. Brenda covered her mouth, horrified. Matt clenched his fists. They looked at me, expecting me to collapse, expecting to see the suffering mother cry for her lost son. But I raised my head. My eyes were dry, my hands steady. I wrote my answer, savoring every letter. "Son, I will be there. I wouldn't miss your wedding for anything in the world. And don't worry, I carry with me the greatest gift you will ever receive in your life. See you at the altar." I put the phone away and looked at my allies. "Let's go," I said. "We have a wedding to attend, and I think the groom is in for an unforgettable surprise." I returned to Mr. Henderson's office with my stomach turning, not from nerves, but from disgust. Brenda and Matt had stayed in the neighborhood keeping watch, but I needed to confirm the last piece of the legal puzzle before showing up at that church. Mr. Henderson was waiting for me with a blue folder on his desk. His face said it all. There was no good news, or rather, there was news that confirmed the worst of the human condition. "Sit down, Mrs. Miller," he told me, pushing the folder toward me. "You were right. Your intuition didn't fail. Here is the true story of the noble family your son thinks he is marrying into." I opened the file. The first sheet was a financial report on Richard Sterling, the man who had looked at me with contempt for serving lasagna at my own table, the man who boasted of hyphenated last names and estates abroad. It turns out Richard has no estates, no companies, no lineage. The only thing he has is debt. I read the numbers and felt dizzy. This man, who always wore Italian suits and smoked imported cigars, was a gambling addict, a lost, compulsive gambler. He frequented clandestine casinos on the north side of town and had borrowed money from very dangerous people, loan sharks of the kind who don't send collection letters, but send thugs to break your legs. "Look at the figure, Susan," Mr. Henderson pointed out, his index finger on the paper. I looked at the total amount of the overdue debt. My blood froze. The amount was almost identical to the sum of my life savings, plus the sale price of the rental house. It was no coincidence. Thomas didn't rob me to build a future with his wife. Thomas robbed me to save his father-in-law's skin. My son, in his infinite stupidity and blindness, had become the ATM for a family of con artists. Surely Richard wrapped him up with tales of honor and loyalty, making him believe that helping the family was a man's obligation. Poor devil, I murmured, feeling a mix of rage and pity for my own son. He thinks he's a savior, and he's just a pawn. But the trash didn't end there. I turned the page and found the details of the sale of the Olive Street house. That quick and dirty sale they did yesterday. "Remember the real estate agent who carried out the operation?" asked Mr. Henderson, with that half-smile of someone who has already seen everything in this life. "A certain Brad?" "Yes. Thomas told me he was a trusted real estate expert." Well, it turns out the trusted expert's last name is the same as Vanessa's mother's maiden name. He is her distant cousin. I leaned back in the chair, feeling indignation burn my insides. Everything had stayed in the family. The cousins sold the house, charged an inflated commission, and they made sure everything was done in record time, without uncomfortable questions. It was a surgical operation, an ambush planned at family dinners where I wasn't invited. "And here is the final blow," said Mr. Henderson, showing me the last document. "It is the tracking of the bank transfer. I expected to see that the money had gone to a joint account for the newlyweds. I thought that, at least, my son would have access to what he had stolen from me. But no. The money from the sale didn't enter Thomas's account. It went directly to an account in the name of Richard Auden Thomas, an account where both signatures are required to withdraw. But curiously, the money went out 2 hours later toward an account in the Cayman Islands, known for being used to pay high-level gambling debts. Thomas doesn't have the money anymore, Susan. Not even he has it. He handed it on a silver platter to the old man to pay his vices. Your son has been left without a mother, without a house, and now, without the money he stole. They have squeezed him like an orange, and they will throw away the peel as soon as he is useless." I closed the folder gently. My hands were no longer trembling. The image of Richard, with his arrogant attitude and airs of grandeur, became grotesque to me. He wasn't an aristocrat. He was a parasite who had used his daughter as bait to trap a useful fool, my son. And Vanessa. She knew everything. She was the one who pressured. She was the one who whispered in Thomas's ear that I was selfish for not letting go of the money. She knew her father had the noose around his neck, and she didn't care about sacrificing me to save him. "They are a pack of wolves," I said, standing up. "But they picked the wrong prey. They thought I was an old, tired sheep. They don't know this sheep has fangs." Mr. Henderson looked at me with respect. "Are you ready to go to the church, Mrs. Miller?" "More than ready. Counselor, let's unmask the royalty. I want to see Richard's face when he finds out the money he thought would pay his debts is the product of a fraud that is going to take him straight to jail along with his son-in-law." I grabbed my purse. I didn't feel pain anymore. What I felt was the absolute clarity of someone who has the truth on their side. My son had chosen his new family. Well then, now he would sink with them. I left the office toward the morning sun. The wedding was about to start, and I, the despised mother, the poor mother-in-law, the invisible woman, was about to become the protagonist of their worst nightmare. Mr. Henderson left the folder on the desk and took off his glasses with a gesture of fatigue. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and looked me straight in the eyes. There was a question floating in the air, one he needed to ask me to close the legal circle, but that he knew would hurt me to answer. "Mrs. Miller," he said with a soft voice, "I understand the trap of the house and the father-in-law's debts, but there is something that doesn't add up for me. You are an intelligent woman, a woman who reads down to the fine print of the electric bills. How did Thomas get you to sign that broad power of attorney? To sell a house and empty accounts, a very specific signature is needed. You would never have signed that being in your right mind. I felt a knot in my throat. That was the wound that bled the most. It wasn't the money, it was the moment. I closed my eyes and suddenly returned to that hospital room 6 months ago. The smell of alcohol and disinfectant hit my memory. I remembered the cold of the sheets and the unbearable heat of my body. I had pneumonia. The doctors had told Thomas my lungs were full of fluid, and that at my age, things could get complicated very fast. I was delirious from the fever. I barely knew if it was day or night. And there they appeared. Thomas entered the room with red eyes. I, in my motherly naivety, thought he had been crying for me. I thought he was scared of losing me. Vanessa came behind him, with that good girl face she knows how to put on when it suits her, holding a beige folder against her chest. "Mom, wake up," Thomas whispered to me, taking my sweaty hand. "You have to help us. The hospital says insurance doesn't cover this special treatment you need. They say if we don't pay or fix the new insurance paperwork, they are going to transfer you to a public clinic. And you know how public clinics are, Mum. You are going to die there." I tried to speak, but the cough doubled me over. Fear paralyzed me. I didn't want to die. And I trusted him. He was my son. He was taking care of me. "Here are the insurance forms," Vanessa intervened, bringing the folder and a pen close to me. "Just sign here and here and here. It is to authorize the policy change. Do it for Thomas, Susan. He is very distressed." My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold the pen. I saw blurry. I signed where Thomas put his finger. One signature, another signature, and one more. Between the sheets of the medical insurance, those that had blue logos and big letters, they had slid a sheet. A simple sheet. It seemed part of the paperwork. I was too weak to read, too sick to doubt. I signed that blank sheet with the blind trust of someone putting their life in the hands of their blood. I opened my eyes in Mr. Henderson's office and felt a lonely tear roll down my cheek. "They took advantage of the fact that I was dying, Mr. Henderson," I said with a broken voice. "They didn't go to the hospital to take care of me. They went to make sure they had control of everything in case I survived. Or perhaps to sell everything fast before I went cold in the grave. That sheet I signed, that was the sentence. Afterwards, they filled in the text as they pleased and got a corrupt notary to validate it." Mr. Henderson nodded, but then his eyes shone with a sudden cunning. He took the fake document, the power of attorney we had recovered, and put it under the lamplight. "Susan, come closer. I want you to see this." I leaned over the paper. "Look at the date of the notary's stamp." He pointed. "It says October 15th. And what does that matter?" I asked, not understanding. "It matters a lot." Mr. Henderson took out his pocket calendar and looked for the month of October of last year. "Look here. October 15th fell on a Sunday." I froze. "Notary publics don't work on Sundays," he continued, with a triumphant smile. "And much less do they go to hospitals on a Sunday, unless it is a life or death emergency registered in the minutes, something that doesn't exist here. This document says you appeared before the notary in his office on a Sunday. That is impossible." "What does that mean?" "It means the notary wasn't even there. Thomas or Vanessa took the signed document days later and paid a bribe to get the stamp with an earlier date, so it would coincide with your time in the hospital. But they got the day wrong. They were careless." Mr. Henderson closed the folder with a sharp slap of his hand. "This is checkmate, Mrs. Miller. This document is null and void. And not only is it void, It is physical proof of a crime of document forgery and corruption. With this, we don't just recover the house. With this, we ensure the judge has not a shred of mercy. I wiped my face with the handkerchief Mr. Henderson offered me. The sadness evaporated, giving way to a clean and bright fury. They used my illness. They used my fear of death to rob me. And now, a calendar error is going to destroy them. God writes straight with crooked lines, right, Counselor? That is correct, Susan. And now, I think we are running late. I got up. I went to the small mirror Mr. Henderson had on the wall. I fixed my hair. I smoothed my jacket. The woman looking at me from the reflection was no longer the sick and vulnerable old lady from that hospital. She was a warrior. I grabbed my purse. I felt the weight of my phone, where I kept my son's cruel messages. "Let's go," I said. "It is time for the ceremony." We went out to the street. The sun shone high. The church bells started ringing in the distance, calling the faithful, calling the bride and groom. I am not going to that wedding to wish them happiness. I am not going to throw rice or applaud when they kiss. I am going to stand before God and before men to tell the truth. My son wanted an unforgettable wedding. Well then, I am going to give it to him. It will be a day he can never, ever erase from his memory. Justice is coming, Thomas, and it is wearing your mother's dress. The ballroom at the country club overflowed with obscene luxury. There were gigantic arrangements of imported white flowers, crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling like frozen tears, and waiters in white gloves serving French champagne. All that was paid for with my blood. Everything was financed with the savings of 40 years that they had snatched from me without pity. I entered through the main door with my head held high. No one stopped me, perhaps because my lead grey dress and my steely gaze commanded more respect than any security guard, or perhaps because, deep down, everyone knew the groom's mother had a right to be there, even if she wasn't welcome. I walked between the tables. The murmur of the people died down as I passed. I felt like Moses parting the Red Sea. My eyes were fixed on the main table. There they were. Thomas was laughing with his mouth open, his tie already a bit loose, drunk on power and alcohol. Next to him, Vanessa shone with her jewels, those they probably bought with the money they took from my ATM while I was agonizing. And standing, with a cut crystal glass in hand, Richard was asking for silence from the 300 guests. "Family, friend, partners," said the old man with his fake voice. "I want to propose a toast to my son-in-law, Thomas, a generous man who today not only joins his life to my daughter's but has invested in our family's future, buying a magnificent property downtown. Cheers to the provider." The applause exploded. Thomas stood up, puffing his chest out like a peacock. He was going to speak. He was going to give thanks, but I didn't give him time. I climbed the 3 steps of the stage with an agility I hadn't felt in years. I approached the microphone that was on the lectern. The DJ, confused, lowered the music. Silence fell over the hall like a slab of lead. Thomas went pale. Richard furrowed his brow, annoyed. Vanessa let out a stifled scream. "Let's toast," I said. My voice came out amplified by the speakers, clear and powerful. "Let's toast to my son's generosity. But first, let's clarify where that generosity comes from." "Mum, get down from there," Thomas hissed, approaching with clenched teeth. "You are making a fool of yourself. Leave, or I call security." "No, Thomas, you called disgrace last night. I only came to open the door for it." I took the blue folder out of my purse. I held it up for everyone to see. "Esteemed guests," I continued, looking directly at Richard's partners. "My son told you he sold my house to buy that new property, the one they brag about so much. But there is a small legal detail they forgot to check." I opened the folder and took out the document with the official seal. This is the deed to my house. And here, in this clause my son never read, it says the property has a life estate in my favor. That means, in plain English, that I am the owner of the use of that house until I die. The house Thomas sold to his investors, and the house Richard promised as collateral, does not exist. It is smoke. It is a fraud. A murmur of horror ran through the hall. Richard's partners stood up, looking at each other. Thomas sold something that wasn't his, I sentenced. And the buyers, whom I alerted myself this morning, are outside right now with the police, waiting to speak with the groom about a major felony fraud. "Shut up, you crazy old woman," Thomas screamed, completely losing his temper. His face was red with fury. He lunged toward me, but stopped upon seeing the looks of the people. "You are jealous. That is what you are. You can't stand seeing me succeed. You can't stand that I have money and you don't. We were always starving because of you. You never gave me anything. Look at you. You are a poor librarian who could never give me the life I deserved." His words resonated in the hall. He accused me of being poor. He accused me of not having given him enough. I felt an icy calm. I left the folder on the newlyweds' table. "That I never gave you anything?" I asked in a whisper that was heard in the last corner. "That your education in private schools came out of thin air? That your suits and your whims paid for themselves?" My hands went to my waist. With slow movements, I unbuttoned the side of my silk blouse and lifted the fabric. There it was, the scar, a thick, ugly, wrinkled line crossing my right side, the indelible mark of my sacrifice. "Look at it well, Thomas," I said, my voice breaking for the first time. "Look at it. You are 34 years old. This scar is 30. When you were 4 years old and entered that rich kids' school where you wanted to be, I wasn't working double shifts at the library like I told you. It wasn't enough." The hall was so silent you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. "I went to a shady clinic across the border," I continued, my eyes locked on his. "I sold my kidney. Thomas, I sold a part of my body, of my flesh, to pay your tuition, so you wouldn't feel less than anyone, so you would have that bright future you brag so much about." I lowered my blouse slowly. "I have spent 30 years living with a single kidney, feeling the pain every winter, hiding this shame so you wouldn't carry the guilt. And today, you use that education I paid for with my insides to rob me. You use the life I gave you twice to leave me on the street." Thomas stepped back, as if I had hit him physically. He let himself fall into his chair, mouth open, incapable of articulating a word. People looked at him with a mix of horror and absolute repulsion. Vanessa covered her mouth with her hands. Richard looked toward the exit, looking for an escape. "I gave you my organs, my son, and you took even the roof from me. I hope it was worth it." The sound of patrol sirens began to be heard in the distance, getting closer and closer. My heart, in that moment, didn't hurt anymore. It had turned to stone. If you are still listening to this and can feel the pain of this scar on your own skin, please help me by commenting the number 1 down below. I need to know there are still people with a soul accompanying me on this path to justice. Your presence is the only strength I have left to tell you the ending. When the cold handcuffs of the police touch the hands of my only son, the red and blue lights of the patrol cars bounced off the white walls of the ballroom, turning the elegance of the wedding into a cheap crime scene. They didn't enter asking for permission. They were agents from the district attorney's office, serious men in tactical vests that contrasted violently with the guests' tuxedos. Leading the operation came Brad, the supposed cousin and real estate agent. But he didn't come as a guest. He came handcuffed, escorted by 2 officers. His face was bathed in sweat and fear. As soon as he crossed the door, he pointed with a trembling finger toward the main table. There they are, screamed Brad, with the shrill voice of panic. They are the intellectual authors. I just followed orders. The groom and the father-in-law planned the whole fraud. Chaos broke out in seconds. 2 agents lunged at Thomas, my son, who minutes before felt like the king of the world. Now he looked like a scared child. He dropped the glass of champagne, which shattered on the floor, and raised his hands by instinct. "Don't touch me! I am the groom!" Thomas squealed, while they bent his arms behind his back. "This is a mistake. Mum, tell them something." But I didn't move. I stayed standing next to the lectern, observing how divine justice acted through the hands of the law. Next to him, Richard's mask of an aristocrat crumbled. The man who boasted of honorability tried to push a waiter to run toward the emergency exit. An officer intercepted him with a yank, throwing him to his knees on the floor. "Let me go," howled the cowardly old man. "I didn't sign anything. It was him. It was that imbecile son-in-law of mine. He stole his mother's money. I am a victim." Seeing Richard betraying Thomas so fast was disgusting, but predictable. However, the cruelest blow was still to come. Vanessa. Taking advantage of the confusion, she had gathered the train of her wedding dress and was trying to sneak toward the kitchen. She was going fast, like a rat abandoning the ship she herself had sunk. "Stop the woman!" screamed Brad from the entrance, desperate to get a deal with the DA. "She is the one with the jewelry. She has the watches they bought with the stolen money." Vanessa froze. A female officer blocked her path. "No!" shouted Vanessa, turning around with eyes full of hate. "I have nothing to do with these losers. Thomas tricked me. He told me he had money." Brad let out a hysterical laugh that froze the blood of everyone present. "That he tricked you?" Brad shook his head, looking at Vanessa with a mix of desire and resentment. "Don't be a liar, babe. Tell Thomas the truth. Tell him why we were in such a hurry to marry you off." Thomas, with the handcuffs already on, stopped struggling. He looked at Brad and then at Vanessa. "What is he talking about?" asked my son, with a thread of a voice. "Tell him, Vanessa," insisted Brad. "Tell him the baby you are expecting isn't that idiot's. It's mine. It is our life insurance for when we ran off with the old lady's money." The silence that followed that revelation was absolute. Thomas looked at his fiancée's belly, that belly he had caressed, that child for whom he had robbed me, for whom he had sold his soul. Everything was a lie. There was no grandson. There was no lineage. There was only another deception, the cruelest of all. Vanessa didn't even look at him. She lowered her head, cursing under her breath, confirming the betrayal with her silence. In that moment, I saw my son's spirit break. His legs failed, and the police had to hold him up so he wouldn't fall to the floor. He wasn't crying for jail. He was crying because he had just realized he had destroyed the only person who truly loved him, his mother, for a woman who was sleeping with her own cousin. The officers began dragging them toward the exit. Passing next to me, Thomas resisted. He dug his heels into the floor and looked at me. His eyes were bulging, full of snot and tears, a pathetic image of the man he once was. "Mom!" he shouted. And this time there was no arrogance. There was terror. "Mom, please, tell them it is a misunderstanding. I am your son. I am your Thomas. Forgive me, Mom. Don't let them take me." He threw himself to the floor, trying to reach the hem of my dress with his handcuffed hands. "Mom, help me. I beg you." The whole hall looked at me. They expected the selfless mother to surface. They expected me to intervene, to drop charges, to hug him and tell him everything was going to be okay. I looked Thomas in the eyes. I saw the child I carried in my womb. I saw the child for whom I sold my kidney. but I also saw the man who laughed last night while leaving me homeless. I took a step back, moving my dress out of his reach. "Officer," I said with a calm and cold voice, "take him away." "Mom!" he howled. "Don't call me that," I responded, looking down at him with an infinite distance. "The mother you knew died last night when you killed her with your greed. The son I bore died in that same instant. You are not my son. You are just a criminal named Thomas Miller, and criminals have to pay." I gestured to the police to continue. "Get him out of my sight." The agents lifted him up bodily. Thomas's screams faded down the hallway, mixing with Richard's insults and Vanessa's fake sobs. I remained alone in the middle of the empty hall of honor. The guests murmured. Some looked at me with fear, others with respect. I smoothed my skirt. I touched my side, right there where my scar was. It hurt, yes, but it was a clean pain. The pain of the surgery necessary to remove a cancer that was killing me. I breathed deep. The air had never felt so light. The storm had passed, and although my house was empty of family, it was full of dignity. And that, nobody could take from me. 3 weeks passed since the scandal at the wedding. 3 weeks in which my house, once full of warm memories, became a mausoleum of silence. The only sound breaking the stillness was the phone. It rang at all hours, morning, noon, and night. And every ring was like a drill in my temple. They were collect calls from the penitentiary. At first, I didn't answer. I stood staring at the device, trembling, heart galloping in my chest. Brenda came to keep me company. She brewed me chamomile tea and took the phone out of my hands. "Don't answer, Susan," she told me firmly. "Don't let him poison your head. He has to learn, but I'm his mother. And maternal instinct is a chain difficult to break, even when the child has beaten you with it." In the neighborhood, things also changed. People talk. They always talk. Some neighbors greet me with more respect than before, admiring that I didn't let myself be trampled. But others, especially the older, more traditional ladies, look at me with horror. I hear their whispers when I pass through the market. They say I am a heartless mother. They say I have a heart of stone for putting my only son in jail. They say a mother should forgive everything, even if they take the bread from her mouth. Those words hurt. They hurt because a part of me, that weak and sentimental part, asks itself if they are right. Am I a monster for wanting justice? Should I have given him the money and stayed on the street just to see him free? The nights were the worst. I woke up sweating, imagining Thomas cold, hungry, surrounded by real criminals. Guilt ate away at me. Finally, I decided to go see him. I needed to look him in the eyes. I needed to find a trace of repentance, a sign that my son still existed beneath that layer of greed. If I saw humility, maybe, just maybe, I would consider talking to Mr. Henderson to seek a sentence reduction. I arrived at the jail on a visiting Tuesday. The place smelled of cheap bleach, sweat, and hopelessness. I passed the security filters feeling small and fragile. When I reached the visitation area, I sat in front of the thick glass and waited. When they brought Thomas, I almost didn't recognize him. He had lost weight. He had deep dark circles and a grown-out beard. He was no longer wearing the groom's suit, but the beige uniform of the inmates. Seeing me, his eyes lit up. But it wasn't a light of affection. It was the light of someone seeing a life preserver in the middle of the sea. He sat down quickly and grabbed the dirty phone on the wall. I did the same, with trembling hands. "Mom," he said, pressing his face to the glass. "Thank God you came. I knew you wouldn't abandon me. I knew the anger would pass." His voice sounded desperate, fast. I expected a, "How are you?" I expected a "Forgive me." I expected him to ask about my health, about my kidney, about the pain caused by revealing my most intimate secret in front of hundreds of people. I expected him to tell me he was sorry for destroying our family. I stayed quiet, waiting, giving him the chance to be human. But the next sentence that came out of his mouth killed whatever hope I had left. "Mum, you have to get me out of here now. The public defender is useless. I need you to hire Mr. Gomez. They say he is the best at getting people out. And tell me, where did you put the money from the sale of the rental house? Because the cops froze Richard's accounts. But surely you recovered something before, right? I need that money to pay bail and move influence in here." I felt as if they had dumped a bucket of ice water on my soul. There it was. There was no pain for my suffering. There was no guilt for having robbed me. He didn't care about my scar, nor my sacrifice, nor my old age. The only thing he cared about was money. He kept thinking money was the solution to everything. He kept viewing me not as his mother, but as his personal bank. He didn't even ask how I felt. I stood staring at him. And for the first time in my life, I saw Thomas just as he was. He wasn't a confused boy. He wasn't a victim of circumstances. He was a selfish, narcissistic, and deeply broken man. But broken in a way I couldn't fix. If I got him out of there, if I paid his bail, he would never learn. If I saved him now, I condemned him forever to be a parasite. "Mum, are you listening to me?" he insisted, hitting the glass with impatience. "Did you bring the checkbook?" I breathed deep. The air of the penal facility seemed suddenly cleaner than that of my own guilt. "No, Thomas," I said with a firm voice. "I didn't bring the checkbook, and I am not going to hire any expensive lawyer." Thomas's face transformed. The hope turned into fury in a second. "What? Then what did you come for? To mock me?" "I came to say goodbye, son. I came to see if anything was left of my Thomas, but I already saw there isn't." I stood up. My legs weren't trembling anymore. "Mom, don't you dare leave." "Mom, I am your son. You owe me this," he shouted, his face disfigured by rage. "I don't owe you anything, Thomas. I gave you life. I gave you education. I gave you my body. The debt is settled. Now it is your turn to pay yours to society." I hung up the phone. I turned around and walked toward the exit. I heard his muffled screams through the glass, insulting me, demanding things of me, cursing me. But they didn't hurt anymore. They were the screams of a stranger. Stepping out onto the street, the sun hit me in the face. Brenda was waiting for me on the sidewalk, with a worried face. She looked at me, searching for signs of weakness, expecting to have to console me. But I smiled at her. It was a sad smile, yes, but full of peace. "How did it go, Brenda?" she asked cautiously. "Good, Brenda. Very good." "Are you going to get him out?" "No," I responded, taking her arm to walk together toward the bus stop. "Sometimes, Brenda, loving someone means letting them crash. Today I didn't lose a son. Today I recovered myself." And for the first time in weeks, I felt I could breathe without pain. Thomas's jail had iron bars. Mine had been guilt, and I had just opened the door of my cell. They say God doesn't punish with sticks or stones, and they also say time is the wisest judge, the only one who puts everyone in their place without the need for lawyers or screams. In the weeks that followed my visit to the jail, I was a silent witness to how divine justice took charge of demolishing what was left of the false aristocracy of the Sterlings. Without my money to plug the black holes of their debts, Richard's fate precipitated like an avalanche. First came the collectors, those men Brenda had heard about. They weren't polite bankers. They were loan sharks from the underworld. They took everything. The least luxury cars disappeared in an afternoon. the fine furniture, the paintings adorning his rented house in the hills. Everything was repossessed or sold for pennies to calm the mob's wrath, but it wasn't enough. A week later, the police knocked on his door, but this time not for gambling debts. It was for something much more serious. The DA, investigating the fraud of my house, discovered that the forgery of my signature wasn't an isolated case. Richard operated a ring of fake documents. He had spent years forging deeds, wills, and property titles to dispossess vulnerable people. The image was on the front page of the local papers. The great Richard Sterling, the man who looked down on me for eating lasagna, coming out in handcuffs, without a jacket, shirt unbuttoned, and face swollen from the beatings his creditors reportedly gave him before the patrol arrived. He ended up in the same prison as my son, but in a different cell block. Fate has a very black sense of humor. And then there was Vanessa, the dethroned princess, the woman who had planned to marry in white with my retirement money. Her fall was less spectacular, but perhaps more painful for being so solitary. Brad, her cousin and lover, the true father of the creature she expected, didn't wait to see the outcome. As soon as he smelled legal danger and saw there was no money to split, he fled toward the northern border. He abandoned her. He left her alone with an advanced pregnancy, with civil lawsuits on top of her, and with the public shame of having been exposed at her own wedding. Her high society friends, those who laughed at my old shoes, turned their backs on her. Nobody wants to be in the photo with a scammer. Her parents lost the house. Vanessa was left homeless, husbandless, loverless, and moneyless. I found out her whereabouts in the most casual way possible. It was a Sunday morning. I decided to go have breakfast at a simple diner near the market, a place I hadn't gone to for years because Thomas thought it was in bad taste. I sat at a corner table and ordered roast beef hash. "Ma'am, here is your coffee," said a tired voice behind me. I turned to say thanks and froze. There she was, Vanessa. But she wasn't the haughty, made-up woman I knew. She wore a waitress uniform, 2 sizes too big for her body, stained with ketchup. She had her hair in a poorly made ponytail, dull. Her hands, before perfectly manicured, were red and dry from washing dishes. And her bulging belly grazed the edge of the table. Our eyes met. Time stopped in that noisy diner. I saw the color disappear from her face. Her lips trembled. She lowered her gaze to the floor, ashamed, incapable of holding my gaze. She expected the insult. She expected me to stand up and shout to all the diners who she was. She expected me to mock her misfortune, to tell her, "Look where you ended up, Queen." I could have done it. I had 1,000 words of hate stored in my throat. I could have reminded her how she threw my clothes on the floor, how she called me a useless old woman. But seeing her there, feet swollen and eyes full of fear, I didn't feel rage. I felt a deep indifference. She was no longer my enemy. She was just a poor woman reaping what she had sown with such diligence. I didn't say anything. Absolutely nothing. I drank my cup of coffee calmly. I took a sip. She was still there, paralyzed, waiting for the blow. "Thank you, miss," I said simply. Vanessa looked up, confused. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't dare speak. She turned around and ran to the kitchen. I finished my breakfast in peace. Upon asking for the check, I left a large bill on the table. A generous tip. Much more than the breakfast cost. I didn't do it out of charity. I did it to show her that, unlike her and her family, I didn't need to steal to be generous, and that my dignity was intact. I left the place without looking back. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I think not. I think the best revenge isn't doing harm, but moving forward and letting life itself take charge of handing out the bill. And that day, In that cheap diner, life had charged Vanessa with interest. The silence with which I said goodbye to her was the loudest scream I could have given. It was the sound of my final victory. The day of the final hearing dawned grey, as if the sky itself understood there was nothing to celebrate. The courtroom was cold. It smelled of old wood, furniture polish, and contained fear. I was seated in the first row, behind the prosecutor, hands interlaced on my lap to hide that my fingers were trembling. Beside me, Mr. Henderson remained stoic, like a marble statue offering me the support my own legs denied me. When they brought Thomas, the air turned heavy. Nothing remained of the arrogant boy who had demanded my house over the phone. The man who sat on the defendant's bench was a shadow. He had a shaved head, worn beige uniform, and shoulders sunken under the weight of a reality that had finally crushed him. He didn't dare look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on his handcuffed hands, perhaps seeking in them some answer to how he had reached this point. The judge, an older man with a severe gaze behind thick glasses, reviewed the papers in front of him with an exasperating slowness. Every second was torture. Finally, he cleared his throat and spoke. "Thomas Miller," said the judge, with a grave voice, "you have been found guilty of generic fraud, forgery of official documents, and breach of trust. But what makes this case particularly reprehensible isn't the amount stolen, but who it was stolen from. The law contemplates aggravating factors when the victim is an elderly adult and direct descendant of the aggressor. You didn't just violate the law, you violated the sacred duty of gratitude toward the one who gave you life." Thomas shrank in his seat. "Therefore, Berg," continued the judge, "this court sentences you to a custodial penalty of 5 years, without right to bail or early parole." 5 years. The figure resonated in my head. 5 years without seeing the sun, without eating home-cooked food, without freedom. My mother's heart wanted to scream, wanted to ask for mercy, but my conscience kept me quiet. The judge looked at me. "Mrs. Miller, as the victim, you have the right to address the court before we close the session. Do you wish to say something?" I stood up. My knees protested, but my spirit was firm. I walked to the wooden railing separating me from my son. For the first time, he lifted his face. His eyes were full of tears and fear. He expected me to ask for clemency. He expected me to use that moment to advocate for him. "Your Honor," I said, and my voice came out clear, without breaking. "I do not come to ask you to reduce the sentence. My son committed a crime and must pay for it. But I do have a special request." The judge nodded, intrigued. "I ask that during his time in prison, he be assigned to the forced labor workshops. Let him mop floors, let him cook, let him work in carpentry. Let his hands, those hands he used to steal what wasn't his, learn for the first time in his life what it costs to earn an honest dollar. I failed by making everything easy for him. Don't let the system fail too, allowing him to be idle. Let sweat teach him what I couldn't." Thomas opened his mouth, surprised, hurt. "And regarding the reparation of damages," I continued, taking out a check Mr. Henderson had prepared for me. "A part of the money was recovered by seizing the assets of his ex-wife's family and his accomplices. The law says that money is mine, but I don't want it. That money is stained with betrayal." I turned toward the public area, where the family who had bought the fake house was seated, the true collateral victims of my son's scam. "I want that money given entirely to the Martinez family whom my son deceived. They lost their savings trusting him. I have my pension and my dignity. They need to recover their peace." The judge struck the table with his gavel, accepting my request. There was a murmur of admiration in the room, but I heard nothing more than the accelerated beating of my own heart. Before the guards took Thomas away, Mr. Henderson approached the stand with one last document. "One moment, please," said the lawyer. "There is one last thing Mr. Miller must know." Mr. Henderson opened a black leather folder. "Thomas," read Mr. Henderson, looking at my son, "your mother drafted a new will yesterday. In it, any hereditary right you might have is revoked. The family home, remaining savings, and any future assets have been bequeathed in their entirety to the Foundation for Children with Kidney Failure." Thomas paled. "Even when you get out of prison," clarified Mr. Henderson, "you will have nothing, no house, no inheritance, no name backing you. You start from zero, absolutely from zero." It was then that it happened. The guards took Thomas by the arms to take him away. He didn't struggle this time. He didn't shout insults. He turned toward me and I saw him break. It wasn't the crying of a tantrum-throwing child who wants a toy. It wasn't the crying of the caught criminal. It was the deep, heart-wrenching crying of a man realizing he just lost the only thing that really mattered. "Mom," he whispered, and in that word there was infinite pain. He held my gaze. I saw regret. I saw the late understanding of his error, but it was too late to fix the past. "Goodbye, Thomas," I said softly. I turned around. I turned my back on him. I felt his eyes stuck on the back of my neck as I walked toward the exit. I heard his muffled sobs, mixing with the noise of the chains on his feet. Every step I took, moving away from him, was like ripping off a piece of skin. But I kept walking. I didn't look back. I went out of the court into the afternoon light. The air was cool. My body hurt. My soul hurt. But for the first time in years, I felt the foundations of my life were firm again. I had done the hardest thing a mother can do. I had loved my son enough to let him fall. So that, maybe, just maybe, he could learn to get up being a good man. Justice had been served, but victory had a bittersweet taste, like the strong coffee drunk at wakes. I had buried the son I thought I had, to make way for the woman I always should have been. Exactly 1 year has passed since the patrol sirens took my son away and broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. If someone had told me 12 months ago that today I would be sitting here in my garden, watching the bougainvilleas bloom with a smile on my lips, I would have told them they were crazy. But life, in its infinite wisdom, has strange ways of arranging things. My house on Olive Street is no longer a mausoleum of sad silences. It no longer smells of loneliness or mothballs. Now it is a beacon of light in the neighborhood. I converted the living room, that same living room where Vanessa threw my clothes on the floor with contempt, into the Susan Miller Support Center. It isn't an elegant office, but it is warm. Every Tuesday and Thursday, with the invaluable help of Mr. Henderson and my friend Brenda, we open the doors to elderly people who need help. Little old folks arrive, with trembling hands and scared eyes. They arrive with papers they don't understand, pressured by ungrateful children who want the inheritance ahead of time, or by grandchildren asking them to co-sign unpayable loans. I receive them. I serve them a cup of hot coffee. I listen to them, and I tell them what nobody told me in time. I tell them they are not alone. I teach them that their signature is their power, and they shouldn't give it away for fear of loneliness. Every time we manage to stop a fraud, every time I see a grandmother leave here with her head high, I feel my own wound heals a little more. But not everything is work. At 64 years old, I discovered life didn't end with Thomas's betrayal. On the contrary, it barely started. Last month, I did something I hadn't done in 40 years. I closed the house, took a small suitcase, and went to see the Grand Canyon. I went to Sedona. I navigated the red rocks and felt the wind on my face. I bought myself a dress with bright flowers, very different from my usual grey clothes. I ate an ice cream in front of the view, without feeling guilt, without thinking I should save that money for Thomas's future. I understood that my future is today. Speaking of Thomas, I went to see him one last time at the prison last week. The change is remarkable. Not a trace remains of the arrogant boy who believed himself master of the world. Work in the carpentry workshops has transformed him. His hands, before soft and manicured, now have calluses and scars. He has lost weight, but he looks stronger, more real. We sat face to face. There was no glass this time, only a metal table bolted to the floor. He looked me in the eyes, and for the first time in my life, I saw my son back. There was no calculation in his gaze, only sadness and resignation. "Forgive me, Mum," he told me with a hoarse voice. And I knew it was true. He didn't ask me for money. He didn't ask me for lawyers. He only asked for forgiveness. I took his hands, those rough carpenter hands, and told him my mother's heart had forgiven him long ago. Resentment is a poison one drinks hoping the other dies, and I already spit that poison out. However, when he asked me shyly if I could help him process his early release, I withdrew my hands gently. "No, son," I responded firmly. "There are lessons that must be taken completely so they aren't forgotten. I forgive you as a mother, but as a citizen and as a woman who respects herself, I need you to finish your cycle. You have to learn that actions have consequences, that they aren't erased with a hug." He stayed quiet a long while, nodded, and lowered his head. He understood, finally, that my love is now firm, not blind. We said goodbye with a kiss on the cheek. I left there with a light soul, knowing I was leaving him in the hands of his best teacher. Time. Now, while the sun begins to set and paints the sky orange and pink, I want to speak to you. To you, woman listening to me while you cook or rest. To you, son, caring for your parents. I have learned lessons with blood that I want to gift you. To mothers, I say this: do not allow love to become a blindfold. Love your children with all your soul, yes, but love yourselves more. Do not hand over everything while alive. Keep your accounts clear, your properties in your name, and your boundaries well defined. That financial independence is not selfishness or distrust. It is the bulletproof vest that will protect your old age and your dignity when your strength fails. To children, to husbands, listen well. Never trade your roots for the fake glitter of in-laws or for a partner's demands. Thomas traded his mother, the one who gave him a kidney, for in-laws who saw him as a wallet with legs. Balance in marriage is respect, not total sacrifice. Do not cut the tree that gave you shade and life just because someone promises you a garden that does not exist. The family you build should not destroy the family you come from. And above all, beware of greed. It is a curious poison. At first it tastes sweet, like the promise of an easy and luxurious life. But once you swallow it, it rots your insides. Greed destroyed my son. It destroyed Vanessa. Do not let money be the third member at your table. Talk about finances before getting married. Put the cards on the table. Do not let the dollar sign divide what love united. The afternoon air refreshes. Brenda is crossing the street with sweet bread for a snack. My life is simple now, but it is mine, completely mine. My scar is still there, on my right side, reminding me what I gave and what I lost. But it doesn't hurt anymore. Now it is a map of my history, a war medal I wear with pride. I am a survivor. My name is Susan Miller. I am 64 years old. I have my house, I have my peace, and I have the absolute certainty that I did the right thing. I chose to live for me. And you? What would you do if that call came to your phone tonight?